Okay, picture this. My team and I are trapped in a nightmare dungeon. The boss is huge, covered in blood, dragging a sword bigger than I am. We're seconds away from dying. My teammates are screaming, "Save us!" So naturally, I ran straight at the boss, dropped to my knees, and proposed. Yep, I proposed to the final boss. My teammates froze. The boss froze, but it worked. The boss started blushing, and that should have been the weirdest part. It wasn't, because from that day on, the monster who could kill me in seconds started looking at me differently. Like he trusted me, like he knew me, like he'd been waiting for me, and I had absolutely no idea why. At the time, I thought I had escaped the dungeon. I was wrong, because I brought something back with me, and that changed everything. Let's start from the beginning.
After the plan failed, we were forced into a corner by the dungeon boss, and several grown men huddled together, shivering. They grabbed my arm and kept shaking it.
Boss, save me!
Save me! Save me!
I swallowed hard and looked up at the boss. The boss was tall, and the dried blood on his face made it a bit hard to distinguish his appearance. He was bare-chested and only wore a pair of loose sweatpants. The muscles on his body rippled, and every line was full of a terrifying explosive force. However, the most terrifying thing was the blood-stained machete in his hand. It was visually estimated to be over 2 meters long, probably solid and very heavy. Dragging it on the ground left a very deep mark. It was estimated that it would take 2 or 3 people to lift it, but this kind of heavy weapon was easily held in his hand. No matter how you looked at it, it was not something that a few normal humans like us could defeat. I frantically recalled the information about the boss in my mind. At the moment when he was about to raise his knife, I had a flash of inspiration. I raised my hand, signaling my teammates who were crying and wailing to be quiet. The few of them immediately stopped crying and looked at me eagerly. In their expectant eyes, I took a deep breath and trotted towards the boss. Behind me, my teammates were in tears.
Sure enough, all his fears were just an act. Come on, boss.
Kill him! The boss is so cool. Let him see your real strength.
I suddenly rushed in front of the boss, and then slid on the ground and knelt down amidst the cheers of my teammates. Hello, my name is Henry. I'm 25 years old, 179 centimeters tall. I graduated from a university with a bachelor's degree. I'm in good health and have no bad habits. May I ask if you'd like to marry me? I'm willing to have 100 children for you. The team has been formed for 2 years, and the missions have always gone smoothly. We've cleared quite a few dungeons of all sizes, and a lot of rewards and resources have accumulated in our hands. Multiple victories have made us a bit conceited. When faced with a high-level horror dungeon, we even took on the mission without considering the danger. In the end, our underestimation of the enemy harmed ourselves. The background setting of this dungeon is 50 years later. Due to humans' continuous overexploitation and pollution, all living organisms have started to mutate on a large scale. Originally, we planned to defeat the boss and force a clear of the dungeon. But after actually facing him, we realized that it was simply impossible. So, I had to come up with a temporary delaying plan based on the boss's tragic childhood. The boss was abandoned by his family since childhood, and all he ever longed for was the love of his relatives. The air was silent. The boss stood still on the spot, and even the teammates were as stiff as if they had turned to stone. One of them hesitated and spoke up.
Boss, aren't you a man?
This method indeed has various loopholes, but the situation is urgent now. We'll just have to stall for as long as we can. I can't let my team members die in vain. I looked at the boss with a firm look in my eyes. Love can overcome all difficulties. From now on, you have to call him sister-in-law. Got it. The boss became even more stiff. He took a step back and tightened his grip on the machete. Noticing his movement, I immediately gave the team members a look. Under my hint, several team members stammered and called out, "Sister-in-law." The boss calmed down. Then, the tips of his ears turned red at a visible speed. Seizing the opportunity to press on, I gently held his free hand. The hand I was holding tightened and loosened alternately, as if hesitating whether to let go or not. I directly led him in front of the team members. "Come, let me introduce you." I pulled him and dragged him to the team members to introduce them one by one. The team members were so scared that their faces were full of tears. But they still forced a smile to greet him to cooperate with me. The boss was extremely well behaved, allowing me to lead him around. He would even bow and nod when hearing the other person's name.
Ah, well, hello.
My name is Matthew.
Good. He hasn't completely lost his human rationality. I let out a sigh of relief. After introducing all 4 people, I pulled Matthew and asked, remembered, get along well and don't hurt them. Actually, I knew in my heart that it was pointless to ask this question. Since I took Matthew's hand, his gaze had been fixed on me. I made a gesture to the team members behind me and tightened my grip on Matthew's hand. Now, shall we go home? Or is there anywhere you want to go? I don't know which word touched him. He glanced faintly at the huddled up team members and finally stopped on me again. He turned to me and let go of my hand, as if confirming something. Matthew bent down and sniffed in front of me.
Henry, what do you want to do?
Matthew stood up straight, with his back erect, sizing me up from top to bottom. Looking at him like this, he seemed even taller. Even my height of nearly 8 meters only barely reached his chin. I recalled the information about Matthew. Under the influence of the pollution, his body had mutated. He had a body several times stronger than wild animals, an extremely strong healing ability. Even if his arm was cut off, it could regenerate in the shortest time. That is to say, he could quickly kill his opponents while being fearless of injuries. I looked at the machete in his hand. The blade emitted a sharp silver light, covered with bloodstains of different depths, looking extremely shocking. I completely dispelled the last thought of forcibly defeating the boss to clear the level. If Matthew goes crazy, I'm afraid no props will work. Our whole team will be wiped out here. Now, the most important thing is to make him relax and let him know that I won't hurt him. I reached out to Matthew again. Matthew's hands are big and rough. His palms are covered with thick calluses. Even the wounds are soft compared to those calluses. He was stunned, tightened his hand holding the machete, and tensed up all over. Just thinking that Matthew might pick up the knife and cut me in half at any time, my legs can't help trembling. But considering the team members behind me, I still stood there pretending not to be afraid. I have no plans. I'm just a little tired and want to go home and lie down for a while. Since we held hands, Matthew's hands and feet have been out of control as if they were rented. Sometimes he walked with his left and right legs in the same direction. Sometimes he dropped the knife. Then he would run back to pick it up. Sometimes he tripped over his own feet. I'm not much better either, but I'm just scared. I don't know what's wrong with Matthew. Just like this, the 2 of us stumbled all the way and finally managed to reach the downstairs of Matthew's house. It's an old residential building without an elevator. The corridor is dark and the streetlights are flickering. It's even scarier with Matthew's heavy footsteps and the dragging sound of the machete. It dragged behind him with a
Clank
sound, making shrill and harsh noises from time to time. Even as an experienced player, I got goosebumps on my back. Matthew took me and stopped in front of an iron gate. Pushing open the door, the inside of the house was dirty and messy, with all kinds of garbage piled up together. It didn't look like a place where people could live at all. Matthew walked in, casually kicked away the garbage under his feet, and led me to the bedroom. The bedroom was much cleaner than the living room. There were no sundries, only a simple bed. Matthew pointed at the bed and spoke concisely.
Here, you can sleep.
I sat on the bed. Matthew looked at himself, then reached out and tore off his dirty clothes.
I don't seem to be that tired anymore.
Matthew's eyes suddenly became sharp.
Where are you going?
I rolled up my sleeves and forced a smile. No. I just want to tidy up our home. I buried my head and started tidying up. Behind me, that gaze followed me like a shadow. No matter what I did, he would silently follow behind me. He was still on guard against me. I was sure that as long as I made any strange move now, he would not hesitate to put a knife to my neck. The room was in a mess. It took me a long time to tidy up a small open space. The garbage piled up like a small mountain against the wall. I carried the garbage out one trip after another. Soon, a thin layer of sweat appeared on my forehead. Matthew put down the machete in his hand and squatted on the ground with me to tidy up. I'm excited inside but calm on the surface. It's too much trouble for you. Actually, I can clean it up by myself. Matthew straightened up from his squatting position.
Okay.
Me, actually, if you really want to help me, it's not unacceptable. Matthew turned his head towards me, looking a bit confused.
You're so strange.
The room was in a mess. It was already midnight when it was completely cleaned up. The whole house has a 1-bedroom, 1 living room layout, and there's also a small storage room. The bed in the bedroom is too small for 2 people. I thought I could probably use the small bed as an excuse to avoid sharing it with him tonight. As it turned out, Matthew was quicker than me. He leaned forward slightly, propping one hand on the top of the door frame and looking towards me. It seemed like an invitation and also like a threat.
If we have a child, we need to sleep together, right?
I originally planned to fudge it, but now it's all in vain. To buy some time, I had to force myself to speak up. Of course, I'll go take a shower first. Matthew didn't give me any time alone and followed me into the bathroom. Just as I was about to close the door, he immediately stuck his hand in the door crack. The veins on Matthew's back of the hand bulged as he tightly grasped the door frame.
I can take a shower by myself. I'll come over after I'm done. Can you wait for me for a while? No.
Matthew flatly refused. He looked at the unprotected window.
There might be monsters climbing in from there.
Aren't you the most dangerous one here? I had no choice but to let Matthew in. The already narrow space became even more crowded after Matthew came in. He looked around and then stood in a corner. With Matthew around, I couldn't feel at ease while taking a shower. Even when washing my hair, I had to turn back from time to check. Fortunately, he was quiet and didn't do anything strange or harmful to me. Matthew was like a large dog. No, a mutated large dog. His hair was messy and his body was dirty. He looked extremely filthy. Matthew just stood there by the door, casting glances at me from time to time and then quickly looking away. His hand clutching the knife handle tightened and loosened, but I never saw him put it down. I began to wonder if this counted as a critical moment. But no matter how I thought about it, this problem was quite different from the previous ones. You know, in previous crises, it meant losing limbs or even one's life. Now the crisis, I swallowed hard. As the captain, I should always think about my teammates. As long as it doesn't endanger one's life, it's nothing. I made up my mind, turned off the shower head, and reached out my hand to Matthew. At least, you should get clean before going to bed. Matthew looked at me and didn't move.
Take a shower.
Yes, right. Take a shower. Do you want to just lie in bed like this? Matthew was covered in blood and dirt. He was so dirty that it was almost impossible to tell his original color. He stiffened and shrank back. It meant refusal. That won't do. Being clean is my last bottom line. I coaxed and cajoled him. You have to get clean to give birth. You can't give birth if you're not clean. Matthew wavered, and I pressed on. Moreover, I might get sick. If I die, won't you be alone again? Matthew let go of the machete he was holding. I dragged him and pulled Matthew into the shower room. Sit here. Matthew hesitated for a moment and finally sat on the small bench. The space in the compartment was small. In order to accommodate 2 people, Matthew had to huddle on the bench. For such a big boss to huddle like this, he looked rather shabby. After Matthew sat down properly, he reached out again to grab the machete placed beside him. The blade hit the glass baffle, leaving several dents. I quickly stopped him. Don't bring this in. But Matthew stubbornly said,
It needs to be washed.
why is he like a dog that insists on bringing its toy into the bath? I couldn't persuade Matthew, so I promised to give the machete a separate cleaning later. I lifted Matthew's face and rubbed soap on it. The bloodstains flowed down along with the water, and a devastatingly handsome face came into my view. No wonder the boss doesn't wash his face. If he washed it, probably everyone would defect to his side. Perhaps my gaze was too obvious. Matthew was a bit at a loss, and frequently looked towards the machete by the door. I comforted him, and started to wash Matthew's hair. I gently pressed and kneaded my fingers on his scalp, carefully untangling the tangled hair. At first, Matthew was still a bit unaccustomed. As I washed his hair, he gradually relaxed and unconsciously leaned forward. His nostrils fluttered slightly, and he got closer and closer as if he was smelling something. I didn't want to show resistance to Matthew's actions at first, but his breathing was really hard to ignore. It seemed that Matthew didn't realize anything at all. He even wanted to get even closer. I hurriedly took a step back and immediately picked up the shower head and sprayed water on Matthew like washing a car. At this moment, there was only one question left in my mind, but I didn't dare to ask. After the shower, Matthew and I lay on the bed together. This bed was originally small. It was difficult for Matthew to lie on it alone. Now with me on it, it was even more crowded. While I was thinking about what else I could do to delay for a little more time, Matthew suddenly reached out and hugged me from behind. I understand this is both a nudge and a threat. If I continued to drag it out, when Matthew ran out of patience, he would just get rid of me with one swift move. The next second, I kissed him. Matthew looked stunned, and his face gradually turned red. Looking at the scene in front of me, I couldn't help frowning. Why does it seem like I'm forcing him? But looking at him like this, Matthew seemed even more muscular. Every line on his body was full of explosive power, far beyond what a human could compare with.
Hey, I've never been with anyone else.
Matthew seemed to want to say something, but I covered his mouth with my hand. Under his gaze, I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "So please be gentle." Looking at Matthew's expression, I had the thought of backing off and wanted to take this opportunity to retreat. How about next time? As I said that, I was about to get up.
I think I can hold on a little longer.
Matthew tried to keep me. I've been injured many times. Knife wounds, falls, poisoning, burns. This kind of internal injury is the first time. Fortunately, this situation didn't last long, because right after Matthew lost control, the bed collapsed. When I opened my eyes again, Matthew was beside me, looking like he had something to say but hesitated. I don't know if it's my illusion, but Matthew's attitude towards me has softened a lot. Compared with the aggressive and murderous look when we first met, Matthew is extremely docile now. I remembered that Matthew seemed to want to say something to me before we started. "What did you want to tell me just now?" Matthew looked shy.
Actually, I just wanted to smell the scent. Your smell is very similar to someone I knew before.
He raised his eyes and looked over tentatively.
So, can I kiss you again later?
I slept directly until the next afternoon. When I got dressed, Matthew had just come back from outside. I don't know what happened. There was blood on the machete that had been washed clean yesterday. He washed his hands and handed something to me. When I opened it, I saw several well-preserved cans and bottles of mineral water.
They're clean and not contaminated.
All the land and water sources in this world are contaminated, except for sealed food. Eating anything else will cause mutation. This is also one of the difficulties in this scenario. Players need to avoid getting infected or leave this world before being completely infected. Otherwise, they'll be trapped here forever. Matthew refused my request to eat together and took out a book from somewhere. He was so absorbed in reading that he didn't even notice me approaching. After getting closer, I could see clearly what was written in the book. How to take care of your pregnant wife. While reading, Matthew took out a pen and scribbled in the book. I don't know which page Matthew was looking at. Suddenly, his expression became solemn, and he drew a heavy horizontal line in the book. I took a closer look. How long after pregnancy can you have sexual intercourse? To ensure the safety of the team members, I made a request to visit others. Matthew paused in his action of collecting the trash.
Let's go together.
How could that be possible? Discussing how to leave with the team members in front of Matthew. I'm afraid he'll come at me with a knife. Matthew didn't notice my uneasiness and was about to leave with a knife in hand. After thinking for a while, I moved closer to Matthew. I originally intended to give Matthew a kiss on the face, but since he was too tall, the kiss landed on his chin instead. However, even this single kiss was enough to fluster Matthew. "I'll be back soon. Besides, you were tired last night, weren't you? And you got up so early to look for food for me."
Don't worry, I'll be back in a little while.
Matthew stopped me, cut his own hand, and smeared the blood on my palm.
This way you'll be safe.
I nodded and walked out of the door, covering my aching waist. It wasn't until I completely closed the door that Matthew's line of sight was completely blocked. It took me quite a while to find a few teammates in the basement. They were bustling around, sharing a can of canned food.
It's been so long since I last had something this delicious.
Yeah. Who would dare to eat those mutated things outside? I saw carrots growing on trees the other day.
It turns out that Matthew brought them food. Several people were chatting away. When they saw me, they suddenly fell silent. Then, they rushed towards me with the canned food in their hands.
Boss, you're finally back? Are you okay? Did you get hurt? Boss, have you eaten? Come and try this canned food. Boss, you don't have to make such sacrifices for us.
I felt dizzy from being jostled around, so I reached out and pushed them away. I'm here to talk about something serious. Behave yourselves. The requirement to clear this world is simple. All you need is a key. But this key is extremely hard to find. We've been here for a month and haven't found any clues about the key's whereabouts. Even the NPC who was guiding us sacrificed himself. We've searched everywhere. Only the boss's room is left. So, if we want to clear the game, we still have to start with Matthew. I rub my temples. Got it, got it. I'll go look for it. It's not safe here. You guys should go out less often. Remembering the monsters I encountered on the way, I couldn't help but frown. When I got back upstairs, I hesitated at the door for a long time. After thinking for a long time, I finally pushed open the unlocked door. In the living room, Matthew was facing the clock. The moment he heard the sound of the door opening, he instantly turned around and strode towards me. I still reacted more slowly than Matthew. Just as I took half a step back, Matthew grabbed my wrist. In the face of danger, I instinctively looked for a weapon to defend myself. However, Matthew just grabbed my hand. He stood in front of me, his voice muffled.
I thought you weren't coming back.
Matthew even threw away his machete casually and squatted down in front of me, looking aggrieved. My heart skipped a beat.
Oh no.
Why do I think he's a bit cute? In order to make Matthew completely let down his guard against me, I started living with Matthew. During the day, I chatted and took walks with Matthew, and at night I communicated with Matthew's friends. Matthew always likes to pick small flowers by the roadside. The pink small flowers were tied into a bunch with a thin thread and handed to me. After I took them, Matthew stood aside and observed my expression. Matthew was very strange at this time. Even though I said thank you, he still looked down. There was nothing I could do. I had to make the flowers into an ornament and hang it on Matthew's machete. Now, Matthew was happy and didn't even want to use the machete that he often used to smash things. Monsters that used to die with one machete strike are now kicked away with his feet. He wouldn't even let the flowers get dirty, even if his pants got dirty. As things went on like this, Matthew became even more attached to me and almost never left my side. I was sitting on the toilet, looking at the blurred figure on the glass door, breaking out in a cold sweat. Matthew paced back and forth and just wouldn't move an inch, insisting on waiting for me to come out at the door. When will we ever find the key like this? Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore and came up with a way to get Matthew out of the way. If we were to raise a child, we'd need these things. Could you please go and look for them? There are quite a few things, and it's probably very difficult to find them now that the human population has declined significantly. Matthew agreed without hesitation. After settling me down, Matthew dragged his machete and went out the door. When the sound of his footsteps died down, I immediately started rummaging through everything. The house is clean, and Matthew has added a few pieces of furniture recently, making it a lot more cozy than before. I searched through the whole place but found nothing. I could only set my last target on the narrow storage room. The storage room is narrow, with a raised wooden board in it, emitting a strong musty smell. I rummaged around and finally found a diary under the thin quilt. It's an old-fashioned cartoon notebook with a built-in combination lock. It looks like it's been around for a long time, and the pictures on the surface have already turned yellow and faded. Before I could start examining it, there was suddenly a loud noise in the living room. I quickly hid the diary and peeked out from behind the door to check. The living room window shattered, and dust filled the room. In the center of the living room, there lay a dying monster. It had 4 legs and 3 arms, with an insect's head on a human body, and was growling towards the window. Beside the bed, another monster was lurking outside, seemingly a bit hesitant. The monsters here all have a strong sense of territory. They generally won't intrude into others' territories without permission, not to mention a monster of Matthew's level. I held my breath and quietly observed. The 2 sides were at daggers drawn. Did they seem to be fighting? Thinking about it this way, it makes sense. They fought so fiercely that they strayed into someone else's territory. Before I could relax, the originally weak monster suddenly attacked the position where I was. Immediately afterwards, the monster that had been at the window also swooped towards me. I caught my breath. Oh no! I fell into a trap. I immediately took out my weapon to defend. After all, the mutated creatures were stronger. I was soon at a disadvantage after just a few moves. After barely killing the weak one, the healthy one attacked even more frantically. Matthew appeared behind the monster without my knowing when. He didn't even use a knife and twisted the monster's head off with his bare hands. The room returned to calm. Matthew looked coldly at the remains on the ground, with a menacing aura that made one shiver emanating from around him. The remains were crushed under Matthew's feet and scattered on the floor like mud. After releasing his anger, Matthew turned and looked in my direction. He was covered in blood, and there was still an unsubsided fierce look on his face. My sixth sense as a human being was urging me to stay away from him, but the remaining rationality was reminding me that I couldn't. I supported myself against the wall and stood up from the ground, and tremblingly held Matthew's hand. So cool. He looked at our clasped hands, and his face blushed slightly. The terrifying look from just now had completely disappeared. He shyly held my hand back and asked,
Do you like it? I can go downstairs and kill 2 more.
Matthew offered to give me a bath. His movements were clumsy. He picked me up like a child and rinsed me under the shower. As he was washing, Matthew blushed. I didn't even need to look to know why. However, I didn't ask, and Matthew didn't mention it either. After the bath, Matthew carried me to the bed, then went back to the living room and silently repaired the broken furniture. Although he didn't say anything, my intuition told me, Matthew seems a bit angry. He installed the anti-theft window that he stole from God knows which house on his own window. Not feeling secure with 1 layer, he even installed 2 layers. After doing all this, he finally agreed to go back to the bedroom. I thought Matthew was going to rest, but unexpectedly he picked me up and walked towards the door. Wait, where are we going? Matthew held the machete.
Meet the neighbors.
I've seen all kinds of monsters this afternoon. Those with 6 heads, 8 legs, and those lying limp on the ground like slimes. Matthew kindly introduced me to them. Most monsters fear Matthew's power and dare not have any bad ideas. There are also a few bold ones that directly size me up, with greedy looks lingering on me. In such cases, Matthew would swing his machete and directly split the opponent in half. I stared blankly at the bones on the ground that weren't completely severed. With such hardness, it should make a great weapon if taken back. But according to the rules, things in the copy world can't be taken back. I remember that I once got an item that could ignore the rules and allow me to take one thing from the copy back to the real world. However, the item is too precious and can only be used once, so I haven't been willing to use it until now. Matthew changed his direction and took me away from the spot, and the bones disappeared around the corner. At night, Matthew dismantled the bed again and assembled it again with great enthusiasm. I was too lazy to care and still thinking about the diary. Anyway, it wasn't me who would be tired. He could do whatever he wanted. Matthew was very quick with his hands and assembled the bed in a short while. He showed it to me excitedly. The bed was very big, twice the size of the previous one. It felt like it could easily accommodate 7 or 8 of me. Moreover, Matthew had also laid out new sheets. I don't know which house he stole them from. They were very bright red, and there were 2 mandarin ducks embroidered in the middle. While I was in a daze, Matthew tugged at my sleeve, looking shy.
Can we tonight?
For the next few days, because he was worried, Matthew stayed by my side all the time. He even had to take me with him when he went out. The 2 of us walked in the ruins, looking for usable furniture everywhere. The world was in ruins, and even the buildings were half destroyed. The originally flat stone path was piled with gravel and debris. He walked in front and would occasionally squat down to rummage through the stone piles. In the distance, the team members were crowded at the small window of the basement, looking over nervously. I waved to them, indicating that I was okay. When I turned my head, a bunch of light pink flowers was presented in front of me. Matthew was bending over, and there was a strange sense of incongruity between his whole image and the bunch of flowers. Those eyes were full of uneasiness, looking at the ground one moment and then couldn't help but look at me the next.
Here, for you.
Under everyone's gaze, my face also blushed along with Matthew's. I coughed lightly and said,
Thank you.
Matthew was still looking for the things on my list. He searched carefully, even turning over the collapsed walls on the ground to take a look. I was choked by the raised dust and took a step back to move a bit farther away. With this movement, 2 of the little flowers in my hand fell through my fingers and landed in the gaps between the stone slabs. Before I could reach out to pick them up, a withered-looking hand protruded from the gap first and stiffly grabbed those 2 little flowers. Then, that arm extended and was obsequiously held out in front of me. Subsequently, a silver light flashed, and the hand was cut into 2 sections and lifelessly fell to the ground. Matthew stepped on it and ground it back and forth with his foot, not stopping until it was ground into ashes. He seemed to have returned to the state when the monster broke into the house last time. Violent and without much sense. He looked terrifying. But actually, he didn't pose any harm to me. I took a step forward and held Matthew's hand. Matthew instantly calmed down.
Let's go. Let's go for a stroll somewhere else.
At night, while Matthew was asleep, I secretly got out of bed. That diary was well hidden in the corner. Just thinking that it might record the whereabouts of the key makes me extremely excited. After carefully prying open the combination lock, a bright light surrounded me. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself in an old residential area. The surrounding scenery was as if an old photo, tinged with a dull yellow color. A short figure came into my sight. He stood in the corner, looking at the children playing and frolicking in the distance, with envy on his face. Although his features were not very distinct, I still recognized him as Matthew based on his vague facial features. Is this Matthew's memory? It seems that as long as I follow him, I can find the whereabouts of the key. Little Matthew was even shorter than my waist. His face was a bit dirty, and his clothes were in a mess. He stood there until it got dark, and there were no other children of his age left in the community. Then he walked home. The living room was very dark. There was no light on. Only the faint light seeping through the crack of the bedroom door could provide some illumination. Matthew cleaned up the leftovers in the kitchen by the light. I was extremely anxious and paced around the living room, trying to find any trace of the key. Through the bedroom door, I heard some voices. It was Matthew's parents. He seemed not to care whether Matthew could hear or not and talked openly.
Oh, this money-wasting thing is back again.
You gave birth to him. You take care of him from now on.
What do you mean by that? Didn't you ask me to give birth to him in the first place?
They started arguing after just a few words. Matthew seemed to be used to this. After washing the dishes, he walked straight towards that narrow storage room. I followed Matthew for the next few days. During the day, he would take a walk outside, stare blankly at the playing children, and when he was hungry, he would go home and eat some leftovers. Sometimes there were even no leftovers to eat, and he could only go hungry. His parents never cared about him. They even thought that the storage room where Matthew lived was a waste of space. After this situation lasted for a month, the world changed. All kinds of monsters appeared and hunted humans wantonly. Because of his small size, Matthew managed to escape by hiding in a cabinet. In just 2 days, the originally peaceful neighborhood had changed beyond recognition. There were bloodstains and corpses everywhere, which was shocking. A few days later, Matthew's parents found him. They were in a very bad state, with sunken cheeks and full of fatigue. The two of them changed their usual indifference and brought him to the basement with great enthusiasm. Countless survivors huddled in the corner, looking at Matthew with greedy eyes. My heart skipped a beat. Matthew also realized something was wrong and struggled frantically.
Let go of me! Let go of me!
But soon, Matthew's voice was muffled by someone.
Why did you bring him back awake? Didn't I tell you to knock him out?
Come on. Stop talking nonsense. Hurry up and do it. I'm starving.
He shouted so loudly just now. Won't it attract those beasts?
Matthew's eyes were eroded by despair, and even his struggling movements gradually weakened. I rushed forward and wanted to stop their actions. But I couldn't touch them at all. My fingers went straight through their bodies. Someone took out a kitchen knife and gestured at Matthew's neck. Just as the knife was about to fall, a monster broke through the door panel and crazily slaughtered every living thing in the room. This should have been the best time to escape, but Matthew didn't move. His face was ashen until the monster locked its sight on him. Matthew was infected. His skin was torn and oozing pus. He was in so much pain that he was delirious and couldn't stand up. But the instinct to survive made him always looking for food to sustain his life. Matthew was slowly moving in the ruins. He crawled for a long time and ate some rotten food to fill his stomach. Maybe he was tired. Matthew leaned against the corner and didn't move anymore, looking blankly at everything in front of him. I felt heartache but was helpless. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a swaying little flower. It was pink, the same as the one Matthew once gave me. It was blooming in the crack. Different from the lifeless scene around, it was full of vitality. I thought for a moment and opened the mall panel. I remembered that there was an item that could allow people to briefly ignore the rules and touch or convey messages. On the last page of the mall, I saw that item. It was very expensive, like a scam. and there was a special note below. The effect varies according to different dungeon rules. The effect lasts for 5 minutes. In the past, I definitely wouldn't have spent this unjustified money, but now, after using the item, I picked the little flower and sent it to Matthew's side. He couldn't see me and stared blankly at the little flower floating in front of him, his eyes full of panic. I tried to speak, but Matthew couldn't hear my voice. There was no way, so I could only pick flowers for him, one by one, to comfort him in this way. In a short while, Matthew was covered with flowers. He picked up a flower, sniffed it, and looked up in my direction.
Who are you? What's your name? Are you a monster?
No one responded to him. Even so, Matthew's eyes were still bright.
Thank you for the flowers. I like them very much. If you're also infected, we can keep each other company.
I don't have much time left. There were all kinds of gravel around Matthew. Not even a patch of sandy ground to write on. I could only pick up a stone and quickly engrave a few words on the wall beside Matthew. Henry, see you in the future. Protect yourself and stay alive. At the end of the last second, the stone clattered to the ground. Matthew propped himself up with difficulty, looked at the words on the wall and pursed his lips. His eyes were wide open, and tears welled up in them. As the first tear slid down his cheek, the surrounding scene distorted and changed. I returned to that small storage room. The diary was still in my hand. The only difference was that there was an extra key on the last page of the diary. A cold mechanical voice came from beside my ear.
Congratulations on clearing the dungeon. This world will collapse in 24 hours. Please evacuate as soon as possible.
Several teammates emerged from the basement and gathered in front of the evacuation door.
You're amazing. Boss, you're my hero.
You're so awesome. Boss, let's go quickly. I don't want to stay in this place for a single extra second.
Let's go, let's go. I'm about to throw up from eating those canned foods.
I looked at the key and didn't move for a long time. You guys take the keys. Just wait for me for a bit. Half an hour later, I trotted back to the others. Okay, let's go. They looked around curiously and asked,
Boss, what did you forget to take?
I pursed my lips and placed my palm on the outside of my pocket. Something very important.
Hey everyone, real talk. This novel absolutely wrecked me in the best way possible. At the beginning, I was laughing so hard. By the end, I was staring at my screen having an emotional crisis. Luo Qi is such a chaotic green flag. The man looked at a terrifying mutated boss, dropped to his knees, and proposed on the spot to save his team. Honestly, legendary behavior. But Jiang Xu completely stole my heart. Behind all that blood and violence was someone who just wanted to be loved. And when you finally learn everything he's been through, yeah, I had to put the book down and walk around my room. What I love most is how this story keeps changing. It starts as survival, turns into romance, then somehow becomes one of the sweetest monster love stories I've ever read. And let's be honest, watching the final boss slowly become the world's most devoted boyfriend, incredibly satisfying. Now I need to know. Picture this. The key is in your hand. The portal is right there. Matthew is asleep in the other room. Would you stay and help him heal, or would you run? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And if you love chaotic BL stories that make you laugh, cry, and lose sleep at 2 a.m., don't forget to subscribe. More ridiculous and emotionally devastating book recommendations are on the way. See you in the next one.